Welcome back to Half the Battle. I'm your host, as always, Daniel Levy, your guest co-host, the 2022 Handicapper of the Year, Andrew Gombas. Today, we're going to talk about the UFC in 2023. We're going to give our year-end awards like we do every single year. I've been doing it every year for a while, but now it's the second annual year of us doing it together, and I think that's going to be a tradition going forward. So, Andrew, a lot to unpack. Quite a year 2023 was.
Yeah, first of all, it's an honor to be chosen for the big awards show. I'm very happy to be here. It was a crazy year in MMA, and you said it best. There's a lot to unpack, and I'm looking forward to trying to do so.
Well, let's get right down to business because first up, the KO of the year, the knockout of the year. I got to let my guest go first. What do you think the knockout of 2023 is?
I think we're going to have the same one here. I think Israel Adesanya over Alex Pereira, just given, the magnitude of that fight, what that meant to him on a personal level. I actually was at that fight, so I got to see that live, and that was one of the craziest moments I've ever seen in all my years watching MMA. So between just the fact that he completely put him out cold with his back to the fence, the fact that he was kind of on his last shot to beat this guy in MMA, it seemed like, and the fight was close up until that point. It wasn't like Adesanya went out there and outclassed him. It was a very competitive fight through 7-8 minutes, whatever it was. It actually seemed like Pereira had Adesanya in a little bit of trouble. Backs against the wall. He creates one of the biggest moments of the year. So I'm going with Adesanya over Pereira.
Yeah, and what's amazing about that knockout and just their whole rivalry is that, like, you watch the kickboxing fights and, like, Adesanya is winning most of them until he got caught in kickboxing. The one that went to decision, could have gone either way. And then in MMA, the first MMA fight was going Izzy's way. It wasn't, scot-free, but it was going Izzy's way. And then Alex ended up, finishing. But that last time it was going Alex's way. That combo Alex was landing on him was beautiful. And then out of nowhere, boom. And I think that's got to be the knockout of the year. I agree with you on that. Just to give a couple shout outs to some other knockouts that I really liked. I thought Bonfim's flying knee over McKinney was great. This kid Ashmoos had this underrated knockout against Patterson where it was very scary. Obviously, Font versus Yanez, Aspinall and Pavlovich, O'Malley Sterling. How can you not bring that up? A little sleeper one. Brian Battle against Gabe Green, Carlos Diego versus Michael Johnson, and then of course the legend Robbie Lawler retiring against Nico Price with an epic knockout. So those are my top ones, but number one, I agree with you. It has to be Izzy versus Pereira.
Yeah, that Lawler knockout was actually my second choice.
Yeah, hell of a choice. Any other honorable mentions or anything else you want to?
I think you pretty much nailed it, because when you're talking about knockout of the year, it's a combination of a few things. It's skill wise or eyes wise, which knockout looked the best. It's how meaningful was the knockout. Like the Adesanya knockout, for example, was for the belt. It was settling his biggest rivalry ever. The Robbie Lawler one, it was his retirement fight. So there's a lot that goes into it, but I think we got the best ones.
Submission of the year. I have a feeling I know which one you're gonna go with, so I'm curious if I'm right in my prediction. What's your submission of the year?
The Black Shear Twister.
Oh, I was wrong. I thought you were gonna go with Alexa Grasso.
Yeah, that's a great one too, for sure. But yeah, obviously as a grappler, it's really fun to see a rare, unique submission like that. I think it's only happened a handful of times in the history of the UFC. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I can only think of a couple. And just the way I bet on him, so I was super into it too. And it just, for me, that was a submission of the year. Just the fact that we see a lot of rear naked chokes, arm triangles, that kind of stuff. But how often do you see a guy win by twister in the UFC? It's one thing if you do it on the regionals against, maybe you run into a guy who's like 2-2 and he's a white belt. But when you're fighting in the biggest stage, like the UFC, and you could hit a twister, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. That was on my list as well. And someone brought up a good knockout that we might have left off. Gaethje's head kick knockout of Poirier. That was a very good knockout and for BMF implications. So definitely got to put that on there. But back to the submissions. Yeah, I had that one last on my list. There were a few that I think need to get some shine. Saeed Nurmagomedov with his damn ninja chokes. I mean, he is just nasty. He's hit multiple people with it. Brito also had a ninja choke against JSP recently. A few other ones I liked. I mean, you got to mention, speaking of ninja chokes, Mayra Bueno Silva ninja choking Holly Holm, securing her title shot. There's that. I really, really liked. I mean, it's not about who I liked, but it's about John Jones coming off that layoff, people questioning him, goes back up a weight class, gets the heavyweight belt against Gane via submission really quickly too. That's got to be there. But my favorite, and I might be biased, but this is the only submission of the year where I was jumping up and down. I was going crazy. And that was Jared Gooden against Wellington Turman. Wellington Turman's a black belt under Glover Teixeira. And people have maybe knocked him out before, but no one's ever submitted him before. And man, that sequence in that second round when Jared hit him with the judo throw, goes to mount, lands some brutal ground and pound, and then takes his back and makes the black belt tap. That's my submission of the year.
I think that's a great choice, especially given the fact that, you know, it's a guy in Jared Gooden who this is not his first stint in the UFC. He's had some mixed results, but he's the kind of guy that just answers the phone every single time and says yes every single time. And he had lost earlier in the year to Carlston Harris. And if he lost to Wellington Turman, he might not have been around after that. So the fact that he went out there, faced a lot of adversity early on, overcame it all. And like you said, to submit a black belt like that, he's got the dog in him. So I think that's a great choice.
And I'm glad you brought up Carlston Harris because he had an incredible comeback finish submission over a black belt in Jeremiah Wells. Like to be down on the cards and then to pull off that anaconda, that's, you got to mention that. And then also that Russian Ronda knee bar. It might not have been the prettiest, but I didn't expect it. And to hit it against the judo player like Edgar, I thought that was badass. So those are my mentions. And my number one is Gooden over Turman.
Solid.
The fight of the year. So this year, I didn't think that there was like a clear case for fight of the year. Like last year, what was last year's fight of the year was Jiri versus Glover, right? I felt like there was no argument. Here I had a couple. I finally trickled it down to one. Let me hear yours first.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And for me, it came down to two fights. One was recently, it was the Rosa versus Aldana fight. I thought was really good, but I ended up going with Pantoja versus Moreno, the title fight, the flyweight title fight. They both landed over 100 strikes to the head, which is crazy. There were knockdowns, there were transitions on the mat. It had everything, including a very close scorecard. And yeah, for me, that was a fun fight from the opening bell to 25 minutes later. You saw both guys overcome adversity in the fight. You saw them push through fatigue, eat shots, give shots, grapple, strike, wrestle, you name it. It was, for me, that one had everything.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I agree with you. Pantoja versus Moreno. I mean, I literally watched it the other day and I couldn't believe the scrambles, the intense pace. And for some reason, Pantoja is always criticized because he goes balls to the wall. He goes 100 miles per hour. So therefore, it might look like he's fatiguing or gassing out. And he might be fatiguing and gassing out, but he's the kind of guy that can push through it and just really is a dog. And then obviously, you know, Moreno's a dog too. You put those guys in there and it's going to be chaos. So that's my fight of the year. But a couple shout outs to some underrated fights that I thought were really good. I know a lot of people are going to put Shavkat versus Neal as their fight of the year. I thought it was a great fight. Don't get me wrong. I just didn't quite have it in that number one spot, but a couple that really did it for me was CJ Vergara versus Daniel Da Silva. Like, dude, when he had him running around that one point and he was chasing him down, and like those are the kind of fights where it doesn't matter, like, you know, if you've never heard of CJ Vergara, if you've never heard of Daniel Da Silva, you see a fight like that, and that's why we got into the sport to begin with. We didn't know who Chuck Liddell or Rampage was. We just knew we like to watch exciting fights. And a fight like that between Vergara and Da Silva is what we love in MMA. I felt like Trevor Peek versus Jose Mariscal was just an exciting brawl. And Durden and Hadley to survive that armbar, yeah, you get a lot of praise in my book. So those are some of my favorite fights of the year, but I'm with you on the number one has to be Pantoja over versus Moreno. So yeah, that's my number one. Who is your fighter of the year for 2023?
Yeah, for me, there were a couple you could make a case for, but I think Sean Strickland has to be number one. You know, he came into this year coming off of a loss at the end of 2022, a split decision loss to Jared Cannonier. And then he said yes, ripped off win after win after win. And I'm going to spoil my upset of the year. I also picked him as my upset of the year over Adesanya. So he goes in, he starts the year off on short notice, gets a win. He gets another win. He ends up in a title shot with Adesanya, who's regarded as one of the best middleweights of all time. It seemed like, to me at least on paper, and I'm curious if you'll agree, I don't remember if we talked about it at the time, but going into that fight, I was like, you know, I mean, Strickland has a puncher's chance, but that's about it. I mean, he's going to come forward. Adesanya is going to counter him. Adesanya is going to kick his legs, blah, blah, blah. And Strickland doesn't go out there and land a fluke punch. Strickland goes out there and control and handedly wins the fight over 25 minutes, going, I believe, 3-0 in 2023. Did he have two finishes? He finished Imavov, right? Or did he win a decision? I'm trying to remember.
He finished Abus Magomedov.
Yeah. Okay. So he had 3 wins. He had a finish in there. 3 good wins. I mean, the Adesanya one's a really good win. So he's my fighter of the year. Some other people who came to mind, ironically, they're going to fight next month, but Dricus du Plessis comes to mind. He finished Robert Whittaker. He finished Derek Brunson, and he catapulted himself into a title shot. Benoit Saint-Denis, another one, ripped off a few wins in 2023. So there were some good choices for sure. And even Pantoja, you could make a case for. He wins the belt. He defends it. Went 2-0. But I think Strickland takes the cake. I'm curious to hear if you agree.
So last year, we both had a consensus fighter of the year, and that was Alex Pereira, right?
Yeah.
Got the middleweight belt. And interestingly enough, we can make an argument he can be fighter of the year this year too. He won the light heavyweight belt. But I actually agree with you. Sean Strickland is my fighter of the year because, like you were talking about, at the end of last year, he had the knockout loss to Pereira. He had the close split decision loss to Cannonier. And the Cannonier fight was in December of 2022. This guy bounces back in January 2023, the first event of the year against Imavov. They call him up because initially, I don't know if you remember, it was supposed to be Imavov versus Kelvin Gastelum, right? So they hit up Sean Strickland on like a couple days notice. The fight had to be at what was it, 205 or 195? It was either a catchweight or it was up a weight class because, you know, Strickland was literally off the couch. So he goes in. It's a 5-round fight. Sean Strickland's not one of these guys. Oh, it's short notice. Let me get a 3-round fight. No, this guy off the couch took a 5-round fight, put a clinic on him for 5 rounds. Goes in there against Abus, who at the time, Abus like had just front kicked Stoltzfus, and people were talking about this is the dark horse, this and that. You know, Sean Strickland runs through him, and then the Izzy performance. Like next week, I'm doing my boldest predictions with Liam, and one of my boldest predictions, I'm just going to give one away right now, is that Adesanya will not fight in 2023. I mean, in 2024, excuse me. And part of the reason being is because of what Strickland did to him. Like, for example, you know, the upcoming fight is Strickland versus du Plessis. Normally, when you have a long reigning champ with such a history like Adesanya, it's instant rematch after instant rematch. The fact that Adesanya is not fighting Strickland next speaks volumes about the mental state of Adesanya after what he went through there. And I don't think we see him again in 2024, Andrew. So that's a bold prediction for you. But as far as fighter of the year is concerned, you mentioned good options. You mentioned Pantoja. We mentioned Alex Pereira, but I'm with you. The guy that takes the cake is Sean Strickland. I mean, if you would have told me this time last year that Sean Strickland would be a UFC world champion, I mean, I've always respected him. I've always thought he was the man, but but champ, you know, there's a difference between a top 10 guy and a champ, and he's a undisputed champ. So you love to see it. He's my fighter of the year.
Yeah, a lot changed from when we had this conversation last year to now.
100%. So now back to the upset of the year, and that goes to kind of some of the ones we've been talking about. So Strickland versus Izzy has to be right up there. Yep. And you mentioned a good one in the last category, du Plessis versus Whittaker. I mean, dude, for some reason, like, it looks super ugly when du Plessis fights, but he's effective. One sec. Excuse me. So it's super ugly when Duplessis fights, but he's effective. I don't know what it is. He's got that one hitter quitter. I mean, even when he gets in bad spots on the mat, he's able to scramble out. He's got insane amounts of heart. But to rock a guy like Whitaker with a jab and to just get him out of there the way he did, that's got to be one of the upsets of the year. Because people were counting him out to a point where it was like, okay, so he's beat. Who did he beat? Trevin Giles and a couple other guys, Derek Brunson. But he's not going to beat Robert Whitaker. I mean, it's fucking Bobby Knuckles. Everyone loves this guy. And he didn't just beat him. He walked through him. And again, when you're dropping world-class fighters with jabs, and yeah, I think he established his presence, his dominance, and that he's the clear-cut number one contender in the middleweight division. And that's got to be the upset of the year if you're not giving it to Strickland.
Yeah, I chose Strickland over Adesanya, but I mean, those are all solid options. And I saw someone in the chat said, oh, no, sorry, that was for comeback of the year. But Mike Breeden over Jubilee was one of my personal favorite upsets because I had him at like plus 300, maybe even more than that. And it was a crazy fight. We'll touch on that later. But yeah, for me, Strickland over Adesanya, which is funny saying it now because if they ran that fight back in a month, like, and Strickland won again, none of us would see that as an upset.
Yeah, that's how, like, I was talking about this with a buddy of mine years ago. Remember when when Ronda Rousey was like, what, minus 1,200, minus 1,400 against Holly Holm, right? And, sometimes when certain results happen, you can call it a fluke, you can call it this, but that was just one iteration of the fight. They run it back X amount of times, it's going to be a different result. And not saying that Holly head kicks her every single time, but what I am saying is that there's no way in hell Ronda would ever be minus 1,200 against Holly Holm ever again. And likewise, Adesanya and Strickland odds are going to be 10 times closer. So yeah. Good point there, dude. Breakout fighter of the year. So there's someone that they've been clawing, they've been scratching their way to the top, and I feel like this is the year they really had a breakout. And I think Topuria is a guy you could mention, but honestly, what's funny about that is that Topuria was my breakout fighter last year. And he only got one fight in this year. Bryce was last year, so he only fought Emmett this year. You remember what the scorecards were in that fight?
I think it was like 50-43, right? 50-44.
Dude, I think there was even one 50-42.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? So that's definitely an option. But since I already gave that to him last year, I got two, one for male and one for female. For female, I'm going to go Mayra Bueno Silva. I've always enjoyed the violence that she brings to the table. And, you take note when, you get those reactions from the ladies when they hit as hard as someone like Mayra does, someone like Amanda Nunes, a cyborg. Mayra kind of brings that to the table for kind of a younger, up-and-coming Brazilian fighter. And as a result, she's fighting for a title early next year. So I think Mayra, she broke out this year. And then also I think Brendan Allen, man, he's always a guy who, like, even back in the LFA days, like he lost to like Fluffy and Eric Anders in LFA, but like he always showed like he had a lot of potential. He's super talented. He's only like 26, 27, and he's got a wealth of experience. He's 11-2 in the UFC, Andrew. The two fights he lost, credit to Chris Curtis and to Sean Strickland. And I would never discredit those guys' performances, but it did seem like Brendan Allen was emotional in those fights. The corners were talking shit to him. They got to him. Those are the only times that Brendan Allen has lost in the UFC. Besides that, 11-2. I think this year he's already had two main events, and he's got to be entering the conversation for at least the top 10 at the bare minimum. So I think Brendan Allen is the breakout fighter of the year from the male side.
That's a really good one, and one I wouldn't have thought of if you didn't mention it. I went with Benoit Saint-Denis.
Yeah.
He went 3-0 in 2023. And not only did he go 3-0, but he had 3 finishes in the first or second round against 3 very quality opponents. It started off big underdog cash against Ismail Bonfim. Then he beat Thiago Moises, who's a former main eventer. He finished Matt Frivola in the first round, which is someone I think very high of. And he's just a guy where it's like, yeah, last year or prior to 2023, I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, but he went up a weight class, lost to Zaleski dos Santos in a fight most people remember for him taking a lot of damage. Then he got a couple wins over Nicholas Stolze and Gabriel Miranda, who no one really, nothing against those guys, but you might not know their name. And then this year he comes in and he beats three very, very good guys. So he's my breakout fighter of the year because he was a guy on almost no one's radar coming into 2023, and I think he's on everyone's radar coming out of 2023.
Performance of the year. So last year, interestingly enough, I thought Wonder Boy got it over Holland. I thought that was an incredible performance, but this year my performance of the year is an all-time performance, but I want to hear yours first.
Yeah, so for performance of the year, I went with John Jones over Ciryl Gane just because it wasn't the fact that Jones beat Gane. I personally, going into that fight, I thought Jones coming back after a multi-year layoff, up a weight class, getting up there in age, troubles outside of the octagon like always. I thought it was a very tough ask considering I didn't even think he looked that good in his last couple fights before leaving the sport for 3 years. And then he comes in and he just effortlessly beats Ciryl Gane, who's a legitimately great fighter. To me, that was just performance of the year. That he walked in after leaving the sport pre-pandemic, comes back in 2023, walks through Ciryl Gane in one round. To me, that was just the biggest, I'm the man performance of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with that when you, like you said, everything you said is correct. Coming off the layoff, all the questions, because prior to that, you remember the fights he was having with Dom Reyes, with Thiago Santos. People were thinking, hey, it might be done.
Yep.
And people were giving him a lot of shit about the fact that, oh, you've been taking 3 years, to come back. And John Jones was saying, hey, I want to put on the size the right way, whatever that means, whether it's a weightlifting program, whether it's harvesting the garden of life fruits and vegetables, whatever he had to do, he had to get himself right. And boy, did he get himself right, because he comes in there. And yeah, maybe people have beaten Gane before or had close fights with Gane, but no one's ever just walked through him like that.
No.
And we're talking about a guy that, took 2 rounds off in Ngannou, right? So to do that, I mean, yeah, John Jones has to be up there. For me, I think the performance of the year is not just the performance of the year, but one of the greatest performances of all time, and that's Jamal Hill over Glover Teixeira. Look at this strike count, bro. 232 to 75. And we're talking about light heavyweight. We're not talking about the little guys. And let's talk about the little guys for a second. Okay. What would you consider to be a high output little man fight? Like Pantoja, Moreno, we talked about how
that's a great example.
They both threw over. Okay. Alexandre landed 130 significant strikes. Moreno landed 150 significant strikes. And I'm rounding up just to be nice. Jamal did 232 strikes to 75. He attempted 419 strikes. Like, these are numbers that are unheard of in the light heavyweight division. And the light heavyweight division is a division that was ruled by John Jones for over 10 years. A division that prior to John Jones, Chuck Liddell, Rampage, Shogun, Machida, Forrest Griffin, like I can go on, Rashad Evans, like, and for this guy to go out there and break the record, the significant strike record at light heavyweight, but he also broke a bunch of records for lighter weight classes, and he's not even 10 fights deep into his UFC career. And little things, since we're so focused on the strikes, how about the fact that he passed Glover Teixeira's guard in that fight? Like, I don't know. That was, I know it might seem like it's kind of early to say stuff like this, but I don't just think that Hill's one of the best fighters in the world. I think Hill is actually one of the best fighters we've ever seen. And that might sound controversial to a lot of people, but yeah, I think that what we saw was true greatness. And for that reason, that's my performance of the year.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that fight. We all, as bettors, we all have those fights where you're like, man, I can't believe I passed that. That for me, that was one of the ones this year that comes to mind when I'm like, that was a bet I considered. I was considering betting Hill. And when the fight was over, I was like, why did I not just pull the trigger? And the reason why is because he's actually a guy that I underestimated on his way up and lost money betting against him more than once. So I was like, okay, in my head, I'm like, okay, you know, maybe I'm overreacting here. Need to trust my initial gut instinct a little bit, just to go inside the mind of, you know, what we go through when trying to make a decision whether or not to part with our money. These are all things I consider. But yeah, that was one where I was very strongly considering it. Didn't end up clicking the button and regretted it shortly after. That was a fantastic performance. Was never close even for a second.
And I think people, so they see Jamal's physique, so they automatically, I don't know, judge him a certain way. Like they act like he's like Roy Nelson or something. And it's like, dude, that is just not the case. Like he just can't have a six pack. That's just not how his physique works. Like that just, it is what it is. But like when you see a guy land like numbers that surpass the little guys, then I just don't understand why you'd even bring up his physique. It's like a non-factor. That's just how he's built. Like I swear to God, people act like it's like Roy Nelson or some shit. Bro, Roy Nelson has never landed more than 50 strikes in a single fight. You know, so
Yeah.
and is gassing out. Whereas Jamal took that Glover fight on like a couple weeks short notice. Cause you remember what happened. Ankalaev and Jan went to a draw. So they needed to get the light heavyweight picture taken care of. Jamal takes it on short notice and then breaks the record. So yeah.
Speaking of Jamal Hill, do we have a time frame for his next fight?
Yeah. He said second quarter next year.
Nice. Definitely looking forward to it. I mean, I'm sure we'll touch on the weight class stuff more when we go through our champs for the end of 2024. But to me, that feels like one of, you know, the hardest weight classes to predict moving forward, because you not only do you not know who's going to win some of those fights, but you don't even know who's going to get the matchups, who's not going to get the matchups. So for me, there's a lot of question marks around that division. And I'm looking forward to seeing it progressing. I personally feel like there's some good fights out there, and I also think there's going to be some good fights from a betting perspective out there, where I think the market has some of these guys wrong, and so I'm just looking forward to that division in general moving forward.
The rookie of the year. That means they had to have made their debut this year. So last year we gave it to, we were unanimous with Jailton Almeida and Natalia Silva. But this year, some interesting ones, lots of options. Who'd you go for your rookie of the year?
I went with Elves Brenner.
Yeah.
And like you said, there were some good options, but Brenner stood out for me because he went 3-0 in 2023, and he beat a couple. I mean, his last fight, he got a short notice replacement. He finished him in the first round. You know, he did what he was supposed to do. But it was really the two fights prior to that. I mean, Zubaira Tukhugov is a solid fighter, and he came in there as a big underdog, won a very close fight against him, and then comes back out against Guram Kudalaadze, who's also a very solid fighter. People are like, oh, you know, the Zubaira fought bad, whatever. He should have got the decision. He comes out there and he has a crazy fight with Guram and ends up finishing him in the third round too. So 3 fights, 3 wins, 2 finishes. For me, I think this was the rookie of the year. And one more reason why I thought he should be rookie of the year is it was kind of a surprise. Like, coming into the UFC, you know how it is. There's some prospects where everyone's like, okay, yep, we know this guy's going to be good. Brenner was 2-2 in his last 4 coming into the UFC when he made his debut. So to me, it was a surprise, and it was decisive in the way that he had multiple finishes. There's no question that the level of guys he's beating is solid. Like Zubaira and Guram are 2 guys who I think both have been in the top 15 before, and if they haven't, you can make a case for it. So, and at a pretty deep weight class too. So he's my rookie of the year for 2023.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of solid options. The Elvis Brenners, like you mentioned, Diego Lopez, even though he had a loss, he had an incredible fight with Evloev and then came back with 2 big wins. Bo Nickel, Ikram, this kid, Mohamed Naimov, to come in there in the UFC, like to lose to Colin Anglin on Contenders. All of a sudden, you're beating Nathaniel Wood and Jamie Malarkey. That's a huge way to make your UFC, rookie year. But for me, my rookie of the year is Vitor Petrino. This is a guy who gives me the vibes of like the new school Paulo Costa, Yoel Romero, back when, you know, Costa took things seriously and back when Yoel Romero was a big threat. He's got that physique. I could see this guy in the top 15 this time next year, possibly the top 10. And out of all the guys, okay, the thing with Brenner, like I can't argue against Brenner being the rookie of the year. Look at the guys he's beaten. Look at what he's done. It's just the reason I'm giving it to Vitor Petrino is because I see him going farther than Brenner. Like I think Brenner is going to hit a ceiling when he hits that top 20, even top 15 if he even gets there. And that's no disrespect. I think he's fantastic to watch. But Vitor Petrino, you bring this guy along the right way, and he's already had some pretty tough matchups that they gave to other prospects, like like the Prachnio and who's the other guy he beat? Modestas Bukauskas. Like those are the perfect kind of opponents you give to someone in their rookie year to see how they deal with that. Because hey, Khalil Roundtree lost to Prachnio. You understand what I'm saying? Like
100%.
not everyone passes these tests. And Modestas Bukauskas just beat Tyson Pedro, all right? So for Petrino to not just beat these guys, but to beat him the way he's doing, so plus his physicality, his well-rounded skill set, he's my rookie of the year.
It's a great choice.
Story of the year. I'm gonna go first. It's half UFC, half boxing, but I mean, it has to be Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou has to be the story of the year, man. I mean, like, to vacate the UFC heavyweight belt, first of all, a lot of us were like, bro, what the fuck? We want to see this John Jones fight. We still want to see this John Jones fight. This man bet on himself. And we all thought, oh, he's going to go box Fury. Okay, I hope the money's worth the brain damage. And then it's him going out there dropping Fury. Maybe didn't quite win the fight because I know boxing scoring is a little bit subjective and a little different, but like he performed in a way where it was like a win. And now he's got all the leverage, he's got all the bargaining power, and that's got to be the story of the year. Because the last time an MMA guy tried to do boxing at this scale, or that it was a bigger scale, was Conor, right? But he had the UFC backing with him. Whereas Ngannou just bet on himself. He said, I don't need y'all, I'm going to do this on my own. Hopefully he's not, involved in some sketchy contracts that don't let him, perform going forward and stuff like that. Cause I do want to see that John Jones fight still, especially now. Like I love me some Bruno Ferreira and, some of these guys in PFL, they're fun to watch. What's the name? Bruno Capoloza and all that. It's great and stuff, but like, come on, man, give me this Jones and Ngannou fight. I think Ngannou had the story of the year.
Yeah, that's a great one. For me, I went with Tom Aspinall. I obviously Francis is a great story. It was half boxing, half UFC. So I went with Aspinall because he got badly injured in 2022. You remember that Curtis Blades fight? No less than 15 seconds into the fight, he's lying on the ground, holding his knee, screaming in agony. And it was he did major damage to his knee. He comes back in 2023. We see guys come back from these major injuries. Some of them never look the same again, especially those big boys, like the heavyweights. It can affect you differently. So your movement. Aspinall is a guy whose speed has been an attribute of his in the past, like on his way up. So it's like, if he can't move his feet as fast, just to say there's a lot of question marks is an understatement. He comes in right into a main event against Marcin Tybura, finishes him in 1 minute and 13 seconds, gets himself into a title fight with this big, scary Russian, Sergey Pavlovich, who's huge. He's one of the biggest hitters we've ever seen. And people are saying going into that fight, Pavlovich could knock him out. Aspinall maybe has some grappling upside if it goes past the first round, some cardio upside. Screw the grappling, screw the cardio. He goes out there and knocks him out in 1 minute and 9 seconds, which to me, that was just a really good story to become the interim champ, which I think we can call – it's a weird circumstance with John Jones and Stipe holding up that division, for lack of a better term. We'll call it interim champ. To me, sometimes when I think of that, in my head, I genuinely forget that it was for an interim belt, and I think it was for the undisputed belt. To me, that just such a great story. He comes back from an injury, responds the best way you'd want to respond with 2 1-minute KOs, and yeah, he's my feel-good story of the year.
So now our favorite category, the J. Perrin Jobber of the Year. And this one was kind of tough for me because it's like last year, who did we give it to? Last year, we gave it to Darrick Minner. It was
Easy
no questions asked. So here I got 3 candidates, and I want your opinion on who you think should take the cake. So first, Abus Magomedov. Last year, I mean, when he front kicked Dustin Stoltzfus, people were talking about like, oh my God, like, do you remember he called out the champ after that? He said, we have a new champion here. Like people were talking like this was the second coming of Christ, right? And then the two performances he had against Strickland and Kaio, it's no big deal losing to fighters of that caliber. It's how he lost. It's like he showed the polar opposite of not even a future champion, but a future top 15 guy. He showed he's just the man for 30 seconds and that's it, so that sucked. Shannon Ross, when you got knocked out brutally on Contender Series, but because you came in there with a broken orbital and you showed toughness, you know what, we felt bad for you. We're friends with your manager. We'll give you another shot. First two UFC fights, gets knocked out in under a minute, Andrew. Next UFC fight lasts a little bit longer, still gets knocked out in the first round. And then last but not least, Japanese Connor, I don't even remember his name. Kinoshita. Yeah. Man, like the hype this guy had, the highlight reel this guy had on his regional scene, like when his only loss was him stomping a dude unconscious. Like I was like, this dude's brutal. And Japan needs a fucking guy to come out there and wave the torch because they haven't had a big prospect in a long time. I mean, there's the Rinya Nakamura's here and there, but I'm saying like Nakamura's still fighting guys like what's that kid's name? Fernie Garcia, right? So he's at the very, very low end of the totem pole, whereas we were looking at this kid, Japanese Connor, like, yo, two knockouts, and you're about to be fast tracked. He gets the winnable matchup against Fugit, the winnable matchup against Goff. And he doesn't just lose those fights; he gets embarrassed like badly. So honestly, man, I think he might be the jobber of the year, even though it just hurts me because he didn't act like an idiot. Like he didn't do anything wrong. He just wasn't ready. But it's just tough. So between Japanese Connor, Shannon Ross, and Abus, who do you think gets it? And who was your pick?
So mine was actually none of those three, but for yours, out of those three, I would probably pick Kinoshita just because of the hype that was behind him. Like no one was hyping Shannon Ross, by example. But yeah, Kinoshita, and like you said, it's nothing he did wrong. It's just was an unfortunate season for him, and yeah, I don't think his future in the UFC is anything crazy, but I'd like to see him, bounce back, overcome some adversity, and at least keep his name in the mix for another year or two.
So who's your guy?
Like you, there was no obvious one to me. I went with Cody Gibson because I watched The Ultimate Fighter and I thought the way he handled himself was like really embarrassing, for lack of a better term. I think he was acting like an asshole, almost bullying Brad Katona in a sense. And then they went out there and had their fight and Katona beat him. It was a good fight, but Katona dug deep, and the whole time on Tough, Cody Gibson's like, "Oh, all you're gonna do is try to grab my legs," and Katona went out there and changed his face. So for me, Cody Gibson, Jay Perrin, jobber of the year.
Darrick Minner, stunt of the year. What do you think?
I went with Anshul Jubilee. I know Darrick Minner. It's not really like the Darrick Minner thing was obviously like, there's a whole other situation with that. So I just went with stunt of the year, I guess, for lack of a better term. Jubilee up 2-0 over Mike Breeden, who missed weight, seemed to be on his way out of the UFC. He's a minus.
Was on his way out. They cut him.
Yeah, they cut him. And he's up 2-0. He's like minus 1,000 or whatever on the live line. And Breeden's just walking him down, barking in his face. To me, I don't even know how you come back from that. That to me, that's the stunt of the year. You're up 2-0. You're up 2-0. You could pull guys off the street right now. Say all you have to do is survive against Mike Breeden for 5 minutes and you win. And they might be able to do it. So the fact that he couldn't has earned him the stunt of the year award in my book.
I like it. So my two runner-ups before I give my number one. So Javid Basharat. I mean, he's a fucking great fighter, Javid Bashrat. So is his bro, Fareed. But in that fight he had against Victor Henry, Javid versus Victor Henry. So Victor Henry is a 30 fight vet. He's never been finished one time, Andrew. Javid, they have a close 50-50 first round. And then in round 2, Javid nut punts him to the point where this guy, Victor Henry, who's never been finished in 30 fights, is convulsing. They say when he went backstage, his balls were like the size of watermelons. They said they had to rush him to the hospital and do all these things. And then Javid is going on social media talking about how this guy quit and this guy wanted a way out. And I'm all about calling out actors. I mean, you remember the year Aljamain Sterling won the Academy Award for Actor of the Year, like, you know, when he won this Grammy, his Oscar. But I didn't see any acting from Victor Henry. I thought Victor Henry got legitimately hurt, man. He got nut punted, and for Javid to act like that, I didn't like that, man. So that was one of the stunts of the year for me. The other one was Ankle Live, same exact thing in the Johnny Walker fight. You illegally knee the guy, and people are gonna be like, "Oh, Dan, you're such a hypocrite because you were giving Aljamain Sterling shit." Guys, Johnny Walker didn't put on an Academy Award-winning performance. Johnny Walker was ready to keep fighting. It was a big difference. And then Ankle Live's going on social media calling this guy a quitter, and it's like, bro, like, you illegally need him. How are you going to call him a quitter? And if he would have put on an Aljamain Sterling acting job, okay, but he didn't. He was ready to go. So that was bullshit. But the number one for the Darrick Minner stunt of the year has to go to Colby Covington. To talk the kind of shit that this man talked, which we've come to expect over the years, and I have no issues with that, but if you're going to talk shit, you got to back it, man. And for a guy with his credentials, with his style, with that relentless forward pressure and how you're going to attempt 20 takedowns and do the whole bit, he didn't even shoot a takedown until round 3. So already the fight was a stunt in itself. And then after the fight, saying the reason he lost is because he supports Trump. Like, dude, there's tons of us that support Trump that can see that you lost the fight and it had nothing to do with your political affiliation. Like, so the way he acted before the fight, the way he acted during the fight, and the way he's acting after the fight. And then also the Leon's dad stuff, like, listen, man, no one's I don't even know if the shit's true. He said that Leon's dad was a former trafficker, which, if that's true, of course I don't fucking advocate that, but like, that's not Leon's fault. So don't take that out on Leon. So I don't know. I just really felt like Covington pulled probably the most epic stunt of 2023.
Yeah, for me, one of the coolest things in this sport is when someone talks shit and fully backs it up.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's what got Colby, guys like Chael, guys like Rampage, guys like Bisping, guys like Connor, fans over the years, is because they talk shit. Like, Connor's the best example. He said everything he was going to do, and then he did it. And Colby, it was cool when he was coming up and when he was fighting RDA and even the Usman fights and Masvidal. You know, he's going out there and he says all this crazy stuff about Masvidal, and he goes in there and fights like a warrior for 25 minutes. He says all this stuff about Leon leading up to the fight. You know, he was fortunate to be in that position, getting a title shot after having a year and a half off, and he just goes out there and lays a complete dud. And to me, you know, if you go out there and you lose a fight, you fight your ass off, there's nothing wrong with that. And Colby did that twice against Usman. I mean, he put on one of the fights of the year in 2019, at the end of 2019 against Usman. And then when they fought in the rematch at the end of 2021, it was another really good fight. Like, you could even, I'm not saying he did, but you could even make a case that Colby won that fight. But you go into this fight, you don't even shoot until and then it was funny when he started shooting towards the later rounds, like when he started pacing, trying to put a pace on Leon, he was having more success. And it's like, why didn't he just do that the whole time? Not to say it's that easy. If he pushes a pace, he wins, but he at least would have had a chance. The way he fought literally didn't give himself a chance. So yeah, I mean, you can't say all that and go out there and lay a dud. It's cool when it works. It's not cool. It's very uncool when it doesn't work.
Absolutely. So we got to talk about our contenders to look out for in 2024 and our prospects to look out for in 2024. So who do you think are some good contenders that we need to keep our eye out for?
So I picked 3. Was that what we were doing? 3?
Whatever you want.
Okay, I picked 3. I picked Umar Nurmagomedov at 135. I picked Sean Brady at 170, and I picked Armin Sarukian at 155.
Nice, nice. So I had a couple contenders. Jack Della. He's not fighting. He's not fighting Brady. He's fighting someone else. So don't worry. No, I like Jack Della. Topuria, and New, Blanchfield, Zhao Nan, Hill Jamal, not Hill Angela.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Bilal, Krylov, Evloev, and Sarukian. Those are my contenders to watch. What about prospects? Who are your prospects to look out for next year?
I went with a really obvious one at first. I picked Bo Nickel as my number one. I think he's probably one of the most hyped up prospects in a long time. And he obviously fought a guy in Val Woodburn in his first fight in the UFC. Finished him, who's not really UFC caliber in my opinion, but he did what he was supposed to do. I know he's training really hard and improving really quick, and I don't think, I get why they gave him a Val Woodburn type fight because he's only been fighting professionally he's only had a handful of fights total. I'm not even talking about the UFC. So I get why they did that, and I think it was the right move. I think they're going to give him a step up, like now, probably, if I had to guess. If not this fight, his one after that. But I think they're going to give him a step up now. And I think he probably is going to pass a lot of those tests. I'm not saying he's going to go undefeated and win the belt or anything like that, but I think with the skills he has already, he could probably beat a lot of the guys in the division. Number two, it was my rookie of the year, Elves Brenner. I feel like I picked him as my rookie of the year, so we got to watch out to see what he does in 2024. He got a couple solid wins under his belt, a couple finishes, so looking forward to seeing what's next for him. And then last but not least, I went with Isaac Dolgarian as my number three. There were a lot of unknowns about him coming into the UFC, and he got his first fight against Argueta canceled. I actually bet on him, and that fight got canceled. He comes in against Francis Marshall and just absolutely obliterates him. To me, I know he's a very strong wrestling background. To me, from the limited amount of footage I've seen, I think the skills are there. And I know it's a bold take, but I wouldn't be surprised if this guy's in the top 10 or fighting for a belt in the next year or two.
Who's sorry?
Isaac Dolgarian.
Oh yeah, bro. That plus 160 in his debut is incredible.
Yeah.
So one contender I forgot to mention is Manel Cap. I've been high on him. I even predicted that he'd be champ this year, but I think it's actually gonna be next year. So he's one of my contenders. But to prospects, Roman Kopylov has completely turned around my thoughts on him. From when he first came into the UFC, he's looking incredible. Danielle Marcos, I think he's someone to look out for. Tatsuro Taira, Fareed Basharat. I think Fareed Basharat, I like both Basharat brothers, but I think Fareed has the higher ceiling. Mike Malat's been impressing me. Mario Bautista, Daniel Zellhuber, Michael Morales, Natalia Silva, Mateusz Rambetsky, and Joshua Van. Those are some prospects for me to look out for in 2024. Wow. Who would you say is the number one pound for pound fighter on the roster right now? This is actually a really tough one for me.
I went with Makhachev, and there's a couple options you could go with. I mean, you could always say John Jones, but given the fact that he's hurt right now, I kind of didn't include him in the conversation. Makhachev, he's just so well-rounded, and he's one of those guys who obviously is very, very, very talented grappler, but I think his striking has made tremendous strides, and we saw it. He knocked out Volkanovski in his last fight, which is a guy he had a very competitive fight with prior to that. He finished Charles Oliveira, which wasn't this year, but just speaking to his body of work, that Oliveira is a guy who obviously former champ, beating a lot of those guys near the top of 155. Makhachev just diced him. He goes out there, head kicks Volkanovski. I think he's number one pound for pound. I actually think he would be a top 5 guy at 170 and possibly could even have a shot to win the belt.
Can you hear me? Someone says sound gone. Okay. Yeah. Don't mess with us like that. All right. So it's easy to say John Jones, but he's injured. And who was the other one that you said could get it but didn't get it?
I just said Jones and Makhachev were the only ones.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, Jones is injured. Jamal's injured. Well, I look at pound for pound different than everyone else does because people look at it as like, well, if their weights were equal, who would win? And then people have like Demetrius Johnson ahead of like Francis Ngannou, and I'm like, bro, but that's like, I view it as Francis Ngannou would soccer kick Demetrius Johnson, like, into the 10th row. So to me, it's like, who's the guy that can beat everybody's ass on the roster? And that's Tom Aspinall. So I think Tom Aspinall is the number one pound for pound fighter. Yeah, maybe he hasn't had the tenure of some of these guys, but I think he can win a fight anywhere. And more importantly than that, I think he can beat any man on God's green earth. So to me, he's the number one pound for pound fighter on the planet.
Good choice.
Gym of the year and coach of the year. For me, they're the same. Gym of the year, Extreme Couture. Coach of the year, Eric Nixick. I mean, to bring Sean Strickland to a UFC belt, to I don't know how much impact he had on Francis Ngannou doing what he did against Tyson Fury, but still came out of that gym. You arguably got the heavyweight boxing and UFC champ, and Strickland, and plus all the young up and comers they got coming out of there. Good little stable of fighters. I love the mindset on Eric Nixick. That's my fighter. That's my coach of the year and my gym of the year. Last year was Fortis MMA. This year, Nixick and Extreme Couture.
I went with the same as you for the same reasons you gave. For me, this was a pretty clear-cut one. I didn't even really have to think about it. Easy choice.
Yes, sir. All right, so now it's time for the fun and the not so fun. The best bets of 2023 and the worst bets of 2023. So let's start off with the best. What would you say? Let's go 1-1. All right.
Yeah.
You give one, I give one. So tell me one of your best bets of 2023.
I think we both had this Blanchfield over Andrade at plus money.
Yep, we both did at plus 160, and then also we both had Xiaonan plus 160 over Andrade as well.
Both of those could be on the list,
Yeah.
honestly. But
So
yeah, I went with Blanchfield over Andrade as my first one.
For sure. I had that and Xiaonan on there, but I'm just gonna tell you what my best one was. It was Bobby Green plus 390 over Grant Dawson.
Sweat free.
That's got to be one of my best bets of all time. Just a plus 390 straight. Yeah, and I picked him out right. It wasn't even about, well, I think the number's off, but I'm leaning Dawson. No, like I picked Green and bet Green, so that's my best bet of 2023. What else you got?
I went with Oliveira over Dariush at plus money. I thought it was a good buy low spot on Oliveira, and yeah, he finished him in the first round if I remember correctly.
Nice. Yeah, he sure did. For me, Josh Frem plus 190 over Cedric Dumas. At the time, man, Dumas was like the second coming of Christ to a lot of people. He was the next John Jones. He's the next Jamal Hill. People were literally saying stuff like that. I didn't buy it. Took the plus 190 on Josh Frem, and yeah, he welcomed him to the UFC in style. So that's one of the best bets of the year, in my opinion.
Yep. And then my last one was Pat Sabatini over Almeida.
Beautiful.
It was like minus 163, and he legitimately looked minus 1,000. The grappling discrepancy was massive, and the fight was never competitive for a second.
You mentioned Dulgarian plus 160 over what's the kid's name? Marshall?
Yeah, I didn't have that, unfortunately. I didn't bet that.
I was on that. That was a good one.
That was a great one.
And then let's see. Oh, I want to shout you out for Leon the third time over Usman plus 215. You gave me some good info on that, so I took it and it hit. And then Brad Tavares over Chris Weidman. I know it was minus 245, but I've been saying since Weidman broke his leg back against Hall, I actually bet Hall there, and I felt terrible about it. But I said if Weidman ever comes back, he will be faded. He did come back. He was faded. And that was that. And then my best night of the year, I actually did your show back when you were doing remind me Sharp Side Saturdays.
It's funny. I thought I saw the comment right there, and I immediately thought of when you did that.
Yeah, I went on your show, gave out Xiaonan plus 160 and Bilal, was it plus 125? I don't remember, against Burns. And that put 3 units on each, and that was like my best night of the year. So yeah, so some good dog shots. It wasn't my year this year betting wise, but I'm really not discouraged. It's just a couple adjustments, and also sometimes, man, because how many years track do you have right now? Like 5 or 6 or something like that?
6.
6. Okay. I'm approaching 9 or 10. Yeah, not every year is going to be your best. Sometimes there's things going on outside your life. Sometimes it's motivation. Sometimes just your reads aren't on point. So this year wasn't my year, but I'm like last time when I had a bad year, I was like super down and super discouraged about it. But this year, I'm kind of like, listen, man, I'm approaching that 10-year sample size. Not every year is going to be my year. That's the bottom line. And there's a lot of fixable mistakes that can be made because someone was telling me, well, it's super easy to avoid having a losing year. And I'm like, yeah, well, you have a 2-year sample size. So, right now you're riding hot. Anyone can ride hot. Show me how you do when you go through your adversity. Are you still going to be here? Are you going to be the guy that's taking out loans? Are you going to be the guy that's freaking out? Are you going to be the guy that's stealing people's money to remodel kitchens? Or are you going to be the guy that, hey, we take it in stride, we move on to the next, and, try to learn from our mistakes. So that's the kind of guy I am. So yeah. So I just wanted to say that because you shouldn't be discouraged. Look, if shit is if you're losing 50 units every fucking year and you just, you have to take out loans, you have to ask people for money, then this isn't for you. But if you're able to, have the proper money management to where even in your worst years, you can still bounce back. You're still good. You have a separate bankroll for betting than you do for everything else. Just little things like that. Then you're good to go. And I'm looking forward to next year. So
Can I just point something? Can I just add on to that really quick?
yeah, please.
So what a lot of people who aren't really like full-fledged in the betting space don't really understand it. And I didn't even really understand it until I was, until I really was betting for a living. I didn't get it. But you don't like in MMA in general, if you're betting UFC, it's once a week at most. And you particularly, like obviously I've known you for a long time, like I've seen your bets. You're not betting every fight. Like you might have one bet on a card, you might have 3 bets on a card. At the even over a year, you don't have this massive sample size. So like you could run really hot or really cold in a year. So it's very different than say like an MLB capper, an MLB better. There's 100, each team plays 162 games. There's games every single day. Like you're going to have a massive sample size. Not to say you can't have a losing year there too, but it's just different when the volume's as low as it is. So I don't think you can really judge by a year. And it's very easy to do that. Like you said, if you've only had 2 years, like say you've only been tracked for 2 years, a year is half your entire sample size. So it feels like a big thing. And I remember when my first couple of years doing it, it felt like, every year should be this massive year. And last year I had a huge, one of my biggest years ever. And this year I didn't. Like I had ended up in very slight profit, and it was very frustrating. But it's one of those things where it's not indicative of anything you're doing. Like I don't think you would say you've done anything differently or necessarily done anything wrong. Like when you do lose over any sample size, there's multiple things that can go into it. Like you said, you can make bad bets, you could have bad beats, bad variance, something else going on. For whatever reason, the chips just didn't fall your way. And I think it's very important for anyone who's trying to bet seriously. And I'm not saying you have to bet for a living. I'm not saying you have to, this be the only thing you do. You have to wager a ton of money on fights or anything. Just if you're trying to take this semi seriously, I think it's very important that you need to understand that. And it's something that I learned. It took me years to learn, but it's not this, oh, you need to win every single time you're betting. You need to win every month. You need to win every week. You need to win every year. It's never going to be like that. You need to make what you perceive to be plus EV bets, get the best number you can, and then keep a level head regardless of your short-term results.
Very well said. Very well said. So, worst bets of 2023, and the two that stick, that stick out. Sodiq over Barboza because of how confident I was. I really thought the way Sodiq treated him in round 1 is what I thought was going to happen. And man, it's also one of the most frustrating bets to lose ever because you kill the guy in round 1 and then you like stop fighting, whether it was a broken hand, whether it was a adrenaline dump, whatever the case might have been there. That was just those last 20 minutes of the fight were so frustrating. and because I went big on it. And then most recently, Bryce over Emmett. Yeah, you can say, okay, Emmett's only path was the knockout, and had that not happened, who knows? But Bryce was like similar to Colby. He wasn't doing that forward pressure that we liked. He didn't like Bryce didn't even attempt a single takedown. Colby didn't attempt a takedown until round 3. So it's just so frustrating. Like if Bryce shot 20 takedowns and then he got caught, then I wouldn't put this on my worst bets of the year. But the fact that he didn't even shoot a single one, yeah, it hurt.
Yeah, for me, I went with Jan over Marab. It's just for me that was a here. So I'm gonna go on a rant here. If I make a bet and I lose, it happens to me every day. I make dozens of bets every single day. It happens to me all the time. I could live with it. It doesn't bother me. If there's nothing about my process that I did wrong, it doesn't matter. Like, it truly doesn't matter to me whether I win or lose in the short term, because I know my process is so fine tuned that over a big sample size, I'll win tenfold, 20-fold, 30-fold, whatever. But that was one of what I hope to keep to a minimum of what I like to call an unforced error, is what I would call that fight. Because me personally, some of the biggest edges I've found over the years are betting on these chain wrestling cardio machines in the right matchups. Not to say it's a blind bet, but it just really, in retrospect, and again, this is all hindsight 2020, but it's very important to me to be able to unbiasedly look back at my bets and say which bets were good bets, which bets were bad bets. To me, that's an unforced error. That's a fight I should never be. That should automatically be dog or pass when you're getting a grappler who has that type of cardio, that type of pace against a striker. And it's not to say that the striker can't win in that scenario, but when you're laying minus 175 for the stake that I used, like I made a sizable bet on that fight, and Marab looked like the clear favorite. I felt like an idiot. And it was an unforced error. You know, there's plenty of fights where I make a bet and it loses and literally brushes right off. I could bet a plus 250 that loses a split, and, you know, it sucks when they read the decision, whatever, but I'm not staying up at night being like, why did I make that bet? When I bet Jan over Marab, I'm sitting there like with a pit in my stomach, like, what the hell? Like, this isn't you. This isn't that was an unforced error for me. So to me, that is my number one worst bet of the year.
Yeah, and I can feel where you're coming from, because it wasn't just, he just got caught real quick. It was 25 minutes of torture. So I understand where you're coming from. So we got 2 more categories. We got to talk about the champs this time next year and the handicapper of the year. Let's do the handicapper of the year first, because that'll just take real quick. Who do you think is the 2023 handicapper of the year? The 2023 Andrew Gombas handicapper of the year, because you won the inaugural one last year.
So can we add? I know last year I added a category for comeback better of the year. Dan Levy comeback better of the year. I have one for that too. So if we could do that one also,
for sure,
I'd appreciate it. So my handicapper of the year, and don't tell him I said this because he's going to get a big head, but is my good friend Magic MMA. He came just short of a 100-unit year. He tips widely available lines, which a lot of people don't do. He doesn't bet until Wednesday or Thursday, which isn't even necessarily an optimal way to bet, which makes it all that more impressive in my eyes that he's able to turn out these monster years, like 90-something units in profit. And he's not even sharing his bets until Wednesday, Thursday, sometimes later in fight week. So for me, he's my handicapper of the year. And then comeback better of the year, the Dan Levy comeback better. Am I saying that? Comeback better of the year goes to Clint, who had a monster year. I think he almost hit 100 units too. I know he was bummed after not having a great year last year, and he's just made so many improvements. And it doesn't seem like it's one of those situations where it was like, oh, he had bad variance last year and good variance this year. It was like, to me, it seemed, I've known him for a long time now, and I think you have also. It seemed like he's really made some changes in his approach, and he's matured as a better. And to me, it was just so great to see, because obviously he's super likable, and you want to see a guy like that do well. So my handicapper of the year is Magic, and my comeback better of the year is Clint.
Yeah, I'm with you on the comeback better of the year. I mean, you said it well. Like, to go from your worst year to your best year. That's like what happened to me the last 2 years. So yeah, Clint, great job. And then as far as handicapper of the year, I think you picked a great one, Magic. You know what's funny? I told you this privately. So Magic's been on Twitter for a long time, right? And like when he was first on there and he had the Yoel Romero profile pic, I thought that he was just like some 15-year-old kid, like like one of those guys. I don't want to mention any names, but you know who I'm referring to, like masterminds, prodigies, and and I thought, he was just some $5 better with a Yoel Romero profile pic that just talks a lot of shit. But man, now that he's been doing this show with you, I see his tweets all the time. He's literally like the funniest fucking account on Twitter. I'm always dying laughing when I see his stuff, and he's got some very sharp takes. So I think that's a great pick. For me, I'm going with Pepe. I think Pepe's had a monster year this year. I think his reads have been on point. I think that he's someone that's very dedicated. It seems like he's all in right now. He's also been very supportive of the show, which if he was a total dick to me and he still had those results, I'd probably still give him the award anyways, because I felt like he's really put in work. But seems like a really solid guy. Yeah, so I got to give him the Andrew Gombas Handicapper of the Year award.
Yeah, shout out to him as well. Great year.
Now we got to talk about the champs this time next year. So, okay, so I'm gonna pull up the rankings. This is the one where I didn't write down my answer. I want to go like back and forth, from the rankings. So, who do you think is gonna be flyweight champ this time next year?
Yeah, real quick. So I actually did this on my show last night, and I did it the same way as you. Like I didn't prepare it at all. So these are still my candid answers. Like I didn't prepare them. I'm sticking with the same one. So I don't want you to think that I wrote these out. These were right off the rip too. So
Great.
125. I went with Brandon Moreno.
Okay.
I think he gets his belt back. I think it's very close between him and Pantoja. I bet Pantoja last time. I think it would be very closely lined again. But I also think that Moreno's the kind of guy who can make adjustments and improvements. We saw him, he lost a competitive fight to Figueiredo the first time. He comes back, beats him the second time, comes back, beats him the third time. He clearly can make adjustments. I know he's lost to Pantoja a couple times now, over
three times
over a multi-year span. But I do think that it's very plausible he gets back in there with Pantoja by the end of the year. And I think it's probably a close fight again, but I wouldn't be surprised if Moreno gets the jump on him this time.
I'm going to go Manel Cap. I think that he's got all the tools to be a champ. Comes into the UFC, makes his debut against Pantoja. And, I mean, you got to understand that, like, dude, he was fighting with tennis shoes in Japan like 2 fights prior. Like the refs got an earpiece on, and like just they're fighting in a ring, not a cage. Like he still fought really close with Pantoja the first time. I thought he beat Nicolau. It was close, but I thought he beat Nicolau. I think he's gonna beat Nicolau again, and I think Manel Cap, either Manel or Pantoja, but I'm gonna go with Manel to be the champ this time next year in the flyweight division. Bantamweight, who are you thinking?
I went with Merab. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. This guy has some tools that we've rarely seen in MMA before. I really like Sean O'Malley. I think Merab's his worst stylistic matchup. Ironically, I think Merab's worst stylistic matchup is the one he's going to fight next. I think Cejudo is probably his toughest fight, but I still think he beats Cejudo. And I think if you get him in there with either Cheeto or O'Malley before the end of the year, I think he beats both of them. So I'm predicting that Merab Dvalishvili is the 135-pound champ this time next year.
Well, the reason I disagree is because I don't think they're going to let Merab get the title fight. I think
it's a fair point.
Yeah, like even if he beats Cejudo, all right, here's Umar. Like it's going to be that kind of thing. I'm going O'Malley, and the reason why is because it's either going to be Cheeto or O'Malley, in my opinion. I think if O'Malley beats Cheeto, I don't think he'll fight again for the rest of the year. So by default, he's going to end the year as champ. So the winner of that fight, I said for the longest time, one day Cheeto is going to be champ, but that Sandhagen fight really soured those thoughts. You don't want to overreact to one performance, but that was a very alarming eye-opening performance. So I'm going to go O'Malley. Featherweight.
Featherweight, I think we're going to be in agreement here. Been screaming it from the rooftops for 3-4 years now, but I think Ilya Topuria is going to be the 145-pound champ. He's going to get in there with Volkanovski, and I'm picking him to win that fight. It's a hard fight. Don't get me wrong. This is not some washed version of Alex Volkanovski, like some people are saying. He went up a weight class and he lost to Makhachev, who's my pound for pound number one.
On a week notice.
On a week's notice. There's no shame in that. So I don't want to take anything away from either of these guys. This, in my opinion, is two guys that probably are in the top 5 or 10 pound for pound right now. But I think Ilya gets the best of them. And, he probably has one more fight after that, whether that be a Volkanovski rematch or someone like a Yair or Ortega, or I think he beats both of them. Yeah, I'm going with Topuria.
Well, I do agree. I think Topuria beats Volk. And again, not because I think Volk's on his way out, just, I just think that Topuria has a lot of championship qualities.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree. He'd beat the Yairs, the Ortegas, the Emmets. He already beat Emmet 50-42, stuff like that. But there's this cat named Movsar Evloev, who's number 9. He's about to fight number 3, Arnold Allen. He gets past that, he might be right up there with for a title shot because he's like 17-0, 18-0. And I'm not convinced Topuria beats him. So it's either Topuria or Evloev this time next year. But I'll go Topuria because that's a safer pick because he's already fighting for a title coming up. But don't sleep on Evloev, man. He's legit.
Lightweight. We were supposed to get that fight.
We were. Yep.
Someday.
Lightweight. What do you think?
I'm sticking with Islam until proven otherwise, but it wouldn't surprise me if a guy like Sarukian got in there and took the belt because I think that is a hard fight for Makhachev. But for me, he's my pound for pound number 1. And he also doesn't fight that often. So like you said earlier, he might only fight once or twice, and that might be enough. So I'm sticking with Makhachev.
Yeah, the only thing I'd be worried about is like him retiring, because
we're going up to 170.
Yeah, Habib like randomly retired, So as soon as this guy thinks it's father's plan or whatever, because like I got Islam over Charles, I got Islam over Justin, Islam over Dustin, Islam over Michael, Islam over Benny, over Fazeev, already beat Hooker, Turner's not, So the guys that are trouble at lightweight are Benoit Saint-Denis, Gamrot, and Sarukian. So one of those 3 could possibly do it, but I'm gonna go Islam. Welterweight. Here's where I think we both agree there's not gonna be a British champion. Who do you think's gonna be the welterweight champ this time next year?
It's a bold prediction, but I went with Sean Brady. I think
champ.
Yep. I think that in a way, like obviously I've been wrong about Bilal a few times, but at this point there's no denying that he's a very solid fighter. And I think he's actually one of Brady's hardest stylistic matchups in the division. Would you agree with that? That Bilal's a hard matchup for Brady?
Well, yeah, we saw it.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. But I think there's guys who are around that spot in the ranking that would not be as hard of a fight as Bilal for Sean Brady. And I also think, you get a guy like Brady, who I think that was his first pro loss. He seems to me the kind of guy that he can learn from that, and I think he can build off of it. And it almost is like what Jeff Neal was for Bilal at one point in his career. Like he gave him a loss. Bilal went back to the drawing board, put together this insane streak, and kind of went on a run. I know it's a bold one for sure, but I think Brady, if he gets a little bit more active next year, I think he could be fighting for a belt by the end of the year, especially at 170 where you have these guys like. There's a chance Bilal wins the belt, and that'd probably be a little bit harder for him to get a title shot. But if Bilal wins it, then loses it, or Bilal loses to Leon, like he could be in there faster than we think, especially because we have like Usman going up to 185. Colby's on his way out. Stephen Thompson's not in the mix anymore. And you have newcomers, like another one I think will be in the mix is Shavkat. But yeah, I'm going with a bold one here. Sean Brady. I went with a lot of I feel like common answers leading up to it, but this is my first like out of the box one.
Yeah, I think it's either going to be Bilal or Shavkat, and I think there's a chance both of them can touch gold this year. One of them dethrones Edwards, the other one either defends the belt against the other one or loses the belt to the other one. So I think either Bilal or Shavkat's going to be champ this time next year. I'm gonna go Bilal. All right, middleweight.
Real quick. I didn't watch our last year's episode, but I found my notes from last year and just a couple funny ones. I realized I put Islam as my pound for pound number 1 last year too.
Yep.
And there were some other funny ones on here too. Like prospect to look out for was Bo Nickel, and he's still a prospect to look out for. So just funny how like some things are way different. Like, there's some people we had like champ predictions that are nowhere near, or some people we had as like breakout fighter of the year who lost this year. And then there's some that stayed exactly the same. So it's funny how that happens. But anyway, what's next? 185?
Yep.
I'm going with Chimaev. He fought at 170. He's up at 185. And it's one of those situations where, he's a good sized favorite against Kamaru Usman. He goes out there, he dominates the first round. The next 2 rounds are very close, and Chimaev wins the decision. And to me, I think that's so impressive, but it's all about perspective. Some people say that, oh, Chimaev's a fraud. He faded in the later rounds. Like, he just fought the guy who was pound for pound number 1 in the world a couple years ago, and he got his hand raised. And how many guys in 185 can wrestle like Kamaru Usman? Because it's not very many of them. And I know there's going to be guys like Sean Strickland who are pretty good defensive wrestlers who's cardio for days, and that's not going to be an easy fight for him. But again, like I said with Brady, there's sometimes fights that can make you better. For Adesanya, it was the war with Kelvin Gastelum, what kind of elevates you to the next level. It wouldn't surprise me if that Kamaru Usman fight elevates Chimaev to the next level. We already know his potential, what he's capable of. If he could stay active in 2024, I think he ends the year with the belt.
Yeah. So here's my thing. So Chimaev used to be the guy, I kill everybody, and he wants to fight every single weekend and do the whole bit. But now that he's rich, he barely fights at all. So we know Strickland and Duplessis are gonna fight. So here's my thing, because Duplessis versus Adesanya is a big money fight with the kind of shit those two are gonna talk. They're gonna build that up. Africa versus Africa. So, okay, I need your opinion on this, because next week, I do my boldest prediction show with Liam, and one of my boldest predictions was Adesanya is not going to fight again in 2023. But now I'm thinking about it. I'm like, well, if Duplessis wins the belt, could that, could money talks, man, and that's a big fucking fight, Duplessis and Adesanya. So I could see that happening. I'm gonna go Duplessis to be champ this time next year. Like, I think Strickland can actually pick him apart. But I think it could be a case where he's getting picked apart, and then that just death touch.
The magic happens.
I don't know what it is with Duplessis. It looks ugly as hell, and he just bonk, So, yep. But if Duplessis does win, does Izzy all of a sudden get the itch again? Like, or do they present him with the kind of numbers on that check to where, hey, come make this fight happen? But I could also see Chimaev. My only issue with Chimaev is, now that he's rich beyond belief, he fights like once a year, whereas he used to fight once a weekend. So, yeah. So I'm gonna go Duplessis. Let's see what happens.
Solid too.
Light heavyweight division. You already know my answer. The one true king, Jamal Hill. Not just the best light heavyweight on the planet, but I think one of the best light heavyweights we've ever seen ever. I made a bet with someone. Who was going to touch gold first, Magomed Ankalaev or Jamal Hill? And of course, they picked Ankalaev. I picked Hill, and it was great because Ankalaev had that draw with Jan, where I actually max bet Ankalaev, and I was so pissed. And then I bet on Jamal in his title fight, and he goes out there and sets records. I just think, as long as he can recover from that fucking torn Achilles, or ruptured Achilles, that's the big question here. But if he does, I think he's a special fighter, and I think he's better than all these guys.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier in the show, for me, this is the hardest weight class to pick a champ because I feel like there's so many intangibles. I ended up going with Ankalaev very unconfidently, and to me, I feel like
you went with Ankalaev for PFL or for UFC?
I went with Ankalaev, but I feel like if Hill wasn't coming off of a major injury, it's one of those things for me. it's with those two, obviously doing no tape, not having seen them fight recently, it's close to a coin flip. I just edged it to Ankalaev due to the fact that he's active right now and Hill's coming off of an injury. Would it shock me if it went the other way? Not at all. Would I confidently pick Ankalaev to beat Hill? No. But I do think that the two guys we saw fight, again, nothing against them. I do think the two guys we saw fight for the 205-pound belt last aren't the two best guys in the 205-pound division.
Agreed.
So for me, that's my stronger opinion. Rather than choosing between Hill and Ankalaev, I think my stronger stance is that Hill and Ankalaev are better than Yuri and Pereira. Again, nothing against those two. I just don't think they're the best at 205 right now.
Agreed. So you're going Ankalaev. All right, heavyweight. I'm going Tommy Aspinall, man. I think he's so well rounded. I called him number one pound for pound for a reason, because I think he can beat any grown man on planet Earth. Period, point blank, on the feet, on the ground. The questions about his cardio. I mean, it's not his fault that no one can last like over X amount with him. That's not his fault.
Yeah.
So if someone is good enough to extend them, we'll see what happens. But until then, Aspinall looks like he's got the goods, and I'm going to say he's the heavyweight champ this time next year. There's no guarantee of when Johnny's coming back, because the injury he suffered, like, his, like, this right here, like, got detached from the bone. So, like when you're shooting a takedown on someone and they sprawl out, and so your arm gets kind of stretched when they're sprawling out. So apparently when that happened, this just detached from the bone.
That's happened to me before.
Man, so firsthand, that's not something that you just 2 weeks of rehab and I'm fighting Sergey Pavlovich. No, this is he might be out the whole year.
Yeah, so it's funny because that reasoning is what led me to picking John Jones, because I think there's a chance he only fights once. It's against Stipe, and he's going to be like a -300, -400 favorite. So that's why I went with Jones, because I think there's a good shot he only fights once, and I think it's probably going to be a favorable matchup for him.
Yes, sir. All right. Women's division. So let's see what we got. Women's strawweight. You already know my answer. I've been saying this since 2017. Yan Xiaonan is going to be the UFC strawweight champion. And I cannot wait for this China versus China all violent super fight. And I really hope that Yan Xiaonan goes out there and beats her in China. Yeah, and violence will be back at strawweight, so I look forward to it.
I went with Tatiana Suarez here. I know she came back and didn't look like the best version of herself, but I think it's also important to note that that was at 125 against pretty solid grapplers. For me, the biggest question mark with her is 5-round cardio, but I think if she can answer that with a positive check mark, that she'll probably be the champ.
All right, flyweights. Right now, Alexa's the champ. I'm gonna go Aaron. I'm gonna go Aaron Blanchfield. What do you think?
Yep, me too.
And then last but not least, women's bantamweight. We got Mayra Bueno Silva. I think Mayra Bueno Silva is finishing all these girls. There's no one that really stands out that is let this person get a couple more wins and they're gonna make. Like, I got Mayra over Juliana. I got Mayra over Raquel, over Ketlin Vieira, over Irene. Already beat Holly Holm. And then I feel no threat by Pani Kianzad and Yana Santos and Macy Chazan whatsoever, and Misha Tate and Julia Avila. So I think that Mayra Bueno Silva is going to bring the violence that Amanda Nunes once brought to that division, and she's going to be the new Brazilian queen. So I'm going Mayra Shitara Bueno Silva to be the champ.
This is probably along with 205, my least confident one to pick. I picked Raquel Pennington. It wouldn't shock me if it's Bueno Silva. Like I said, that fight's coming up, and I haven't really done any diligence on it. I just think off the top of my head, I like Pennington's process a little better, but there's no denying that Bueno Silva has a very good skill set, good finishing instinct. Like, there's not a lot of true finishers in that division. So I think it's going to be one of them too. Because like you said, I don't think anyone's going to come along and shock everyone and, oh, this is the guy now kind of thing. But I think it's probably one of those two.
So I think we did it, man. It's time to wrap it up.
I just
Pause. You said what now?
I just saw your comment. No guy that lost to Marcin Prasnio and Andrew Sanchez is beating Jamal Hill in a fight.
Straight up, bro. Hey, Andrew, really appreciate you coming on here, man. Let's make this an annual thing, just like we have. 100%. Next year will be the 3rd. And let's go ahead and book you back on Half the Battle when Topuria fights Volk. Sound good?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Y'all can follow Andrew at Bets and Picks MMA on Twitter, on YouTube. Do you still do your YouTube channel? I know you got Magic and Andrew, but do you do your personal YouTube anymore?
I haven't been posting on there lately, but I think I might try to start it back up again in some form. You know, the Saturday mornings are really tough for me during football and basketball season because a lot of the betting I'm doing happens right on Saturday mornings. So I had to cancel that show, but I'm looking to put some kind of content out there just because I truly do enjoy it, and hopefully people can get some kind of value out of it.
Absolutely. You guys definitely should. I vouch for this man, as you know, so make sure y'all follow him. Anything else you want to plug or let the fans know or anything?
No, thank you again for having me. I know there's a ton of people you could have chose from, so I don't take it lightly that you picked me for this show. And yeah, thank you guys for all tuning in. Everyone have a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you back next year.
Yes, sir. We look forward to it. To the fans, thank you all so much for your support, whether it's from day one, whether it's along the way, or whether it's more recently. Truly, truly appreciate it. I'm going to be back next week with Liam to do our top 10 boldest predictions for 2024. Please give the show a like. Hit the subscribe button if you're not subscribed. When this is done, leave me a comment. Also, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Best Fight Picks. Make sure y'all hook up my boy Andrew with a follow, and check out all his stuff. I highly vouch for it and recommend it. And thank you guys for an awesome year. So I'll see y'all next week, and until the next time, let's cash these bets.